Hi, everyone. My name is Julie Cook. I'm the ambassador for International Society for Service Innovation Professionals. It's a global community of practice. Today, we have Ali Bigdeli joining us from the Advanced Services Group, which is part of the Aston Business School. Now, Ali, I'll pass it on to you so you can introduce yourself.
Absolutely. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon to everyone. I'm Ali Bigdeli, Professor of Industrial Service Innovation. I'm one of the co-directors of the Advanced Services Group in the UK. We are part of Aston Business School in Birmingham. Great to be here to discuss around service-led business model and servitization.
Yeah, just to let everyone know that we're actually looking at doing a series of these sessions. Now, the first one that we're doing, which is now, we're going to be focusing on what actually servitization is, how is it actually utilized at the moment by organizations, and also, if you have the time, to cover a little bit around this increased investment from the UK government in this area, which I'm really keen to understand your perspective on.
Absolutely. So if we start with the what question, what do we actually mean by servitization? Servitization refers to a strategic shift from selling products to delivering outcomes. Basically, a lot of companies have started to invest on the outcome that is enabled by the use of the products, because that's what their customers actually is asking for. The whole idea around integrated services or performance-based services are coming out from this concept of servitization. When we talk about servitization, there are a couple of changes in the organizations that we're talking about. One is at the level of the business model, which is around what is it that we are offering to the customer and how we're charging them for it. In servitization, as I mentioned, the offering is actually the outcome, which is enabled by the use of the product. We can go through the example, but basically it's about, for the case of Rolls-Royce engine, instead of selling the engines, we are providing the thrusts to move the passengers from A to B for the airlines, and that's the offering. The other part of the business model, which has also been discussed a lot, is around how we are charging the customers. We hear a lot around the topics around pay-per-use, subscriptions, etc. These are the ways in which businesses use to actually charge for the services and for the outcome, which is enabled by the use of the product.
Oh, sorry. I was going to add that, I mean, this model has been used by tech companies now, and they're quite mature in delivering these. Now, what we're seeing now is this is going into other industries in a way that hasn't been dealt with previously, or it's actually really changing the nature of how the service is being delivered. Would you take us through that a little bit as well?
Absolutely. So just closing the statement I was trying to make, that there's a shift in the business model, which is, as I said, from selling the products to selling a package of product and services, and ultimately selling the outcomes. As you said, in the software industry, it has been the business model that they've been using, for instance, software as a service. But for manufacturing is a pretty new concept, in the sense that they have been designing, manufacturing, delivering products. Now they started to realize that they need to do for the customers, and there are some different reasons that they do it, which we can discuss around why businesses actually attract to these types of business models. As I was mentioning, that's the one big shift that's happening in manufacturing, heavy equipment manufacturers, and so on. And the other big shift, which we're calling, is around the organizational aspects, the organizational change, the organizational shift, because the whole sales mindset needs to be changed. We've seen a lot of the changes around the sales logic, which is selling from product to selling value, basically. New capabilities are required, both from the design of the products into the delivery of a lot of these services. Risk management, of course, is a big shift when we talk about servitization, and ultimately is about services culture. So a lot of the changes are happening or needs to happen inside the organizations when talk about services and servitization. One other aspect which you refer to is around this technology and technological shift, which are actually a very strong enabler of servitization. If you imagine the whole advancement around data analytics, big data analytics, AI, and so on and so forth, has enabled a lot of businesses to be able to monitor how the product has been used by the customers. So getting a lot of data back from their assets in the operations, analyze a lot of the data, and actually being able to provide or we refer to advisory services back to the customers as to how, if you use our products in this way, you would be able to achieve more. You will be able to be more efficient and effective in your operations. So the advancement in technologies enable a lot of the businesses to start investing in these new business models.
You mentioned a really interesting point around risk. You mentioned risk, and there's also the skills aspect. But I wanted to touch on the risk and get your point of view around the fact that, at least what I'm seeing in mining, is that what the operations are saying is that risk is something that's not, when they're looking at these kind of arrangements, risk is not something that they can share that risk equally with the vendors. The vendors say they're able to handle it, but the operations don't want to take that risk and then have things happen when they don't have full control of the operations and aren't able to manage those risks, or don't have the capability or the people or even as much skin in the game to manage those risks properly. What are your thoughts around how risk is being managed in this?
I think if you focus on that example of mining and then consider how servitization can actually be applied, or what does it actually mean for the mining sector or heavy equipment sector, there's a big shift that we see, and that is happening in some of the regions, that there's shifts from equipment sales to availability and performance, right? So instead of the OEM selling the trucks or drills or crushers, they are selling the uptime, the tons move, or like what they refer to as cost per tons. So they are moving to the direction that they are selling to the operators that let us do what we are good at, which is the operating, the availability of the let's say trucks in your operations, and you actually operated something that you're good at. So when we talk about servitization, the whole risk profile has started to shift. A lot of the risks goes back to the manufacturers and OEM because these contracts usually involve that if the machines and if the equipment aren't ready to be used, they will be penalized. And then therefore they need to ensure that they know how the machine is being used in customers' operations, what sort of activities they're performing, and what conditions, etc., to ensure that the machines are available for when the customer needs it. That risks also comes with a reward. So the whole idea of servitization is around risks and rewards. So the more risks you take, the more rewards you're gonna pick from the customers. Of course, that will reduce some of the costs for the customers because you're reducing the risks from their operations. So they shouldn't worry about what should I do if the driver comes up next day and the machine isn't working, or our drill isn't working, for instance, and then the whole operation will need to go to halt. Whereas by having such outcome-based contracts, there is a guaranteed uptime and guaranteed availability in place. And then the other factor that is very much related to this for OEMs is around this predictive maintenance. So they're constantly aware of how the machine is being used. The likelihood of something that might happen to the machines is something that they can predict. And before that happens, they can intervene and they can repair it. So the whole idea of we're getting, I don't know, we're getting a signal from these machines that it may break down in the next 24 hours or 48 hours. So they can ensure that there is there's someone there that can repair it, or they can send the spare parts to repair it immediately. So the whole optimization of the operations and the risk that they're taking shifted actually based on these contracts. Did I answer your question? I think that's what you were thinking as well.
I think, yeah, you have, but I think that we also need to delve into it at a next session a little bit deeper, because we got a few things to cover during this session. But I think cost sharing also, you know, goes hand in hand with that risk sharing, and I kind of, you know, based on my own experiences, I kind of wonder what are the foundational pieces you need to have on both sides to be able to run that model successfully, because we know that in manufacturing, in some areas it has worked well, but in some other areas they've ended up winding it back because it hasn't been a model that has been successful. But I think maybe right now it's better if we focus around maybe because I want to go into that, but I feel like that requires its own whole session. What about the change in workforce? I think that's something. For example, in mining, the average age of a mining worker is around 50. So that's pretty right. So we're just now coming to a point where there's a shift. There's a big shift happening in leadership. So there's a changing of guards, so to speak, a changing of technology. We've gone from having products and having things working silo, and everything has been digitized to a certain extent. Now we're looking at integration of these disparate systems. So like and I feel like this is something that's pushing that servitization element further, and it's actually developed it beyond what it used to be, which became like, you know, outsourcing and having service level agreements. Now we're moving to this next phase because the technology is there, but that also means a lot of change to you know, the dynamics of how work and value is created, and kinds how work is done. But you've done a lot of work with you know, the vendors and the OEMs, so I'm interested to know you know, what do you see in that space?
I think it's a very valid point in terms of the workforce. What we see, interestingly enough, we had a big event yesterday and the day before talking to businesses, and something that usually comes up is around this skills gap. That when we talk about these outcome-based business models, because a traditional way of the two things, one is around the more technical skill gaps, and then more softer one, which is around the customer facing roles, basically. So if you start with the latter one, which is around selling services versus selling products, is very, very different. You come across a lot of the product salespeople that may not have seen the customers, and then the whole idea of selling services is that from a transaction that moves to the relationship. So you need to have people in place to be able to make the relationship with the customers. The whole scenario that we talked about risk is around when you win, we win. If you're successful in your business, we will be successful. If you fail, we fail as well, because if you're not able to use your machines, then we won't get paid. Therefore, the whole idea is shifted from a supplier perspective into a collaborators perspective. So we're not really your supplier. We're not selling you anything. We are going to collaboration with you. That's one aspect of it, which requires a lot of investments around education, preparation of this of the workforce, etc., from the OEM's perspective, and also from the engineering perspective. There's this whole idea of what we refer to as design for service. The more that you move into this idea of services and servitization, the more that you realize that products needs to be designed in a way that the service and service elements of it can become easier. A lot of times we come across businesses that they've got a product where where service and the service elements are very difficult to perform. Therefore, they need to redesign the products to be able to not just last longer, but also to be able to service it and maintain it easier for the clients. So that's from the OEM's perspective. From the user's perspective, as you mentioned, for instance, from the operator's perspective, that's absolutely spot on. I think there is a shortage of skills, especially around some of those industries that the demographic and of the skills are like the age. There's an element. And the other thing that I heard yesterday, that services in some countries don't get attention from even the youngsters that want to go to industry because of the cultural things. They might consider that services is about serving people. It's not as high level as being an engineer, for instance. So there are lots of things that needs to be playing out in that sense to be able to make sure that we are reducing the gap, the skills gap, when we talk about service-led business models.
Okay. I think that's also another point that we need to delve a little bit deeper into at the next session. Now, what I was really interested when we first got introduced, Jim sent me the brochure, which was around UK government's investment in servitization. I found that extremely interesting because I wasn't actually aware that there was a huge amount of investment being made in this area. And I was keen to hear your thoughts on why that is.
Absolutely. So from the government perspective, they're still very much at the policy R&D level. So recently we finished a very large project focusing on the impact of servitization on productivity and environmental sustainability. As you can imagine, the productivity is pretty low, or it hasn't been to where it should be after COVID, for instance. So there are a lot of investments have been made in the UK to understand and find a way to elevate productivity. And based on the study that we did, based on the 3-year projects, it has become clear that services definitely improve productivity, in a sense that it will optimize operations because it reduced the downtime, it make the utilizations much better. So the whole operations of the customers will become much more efficient because the downtimes are low, and then they can run with their operations. Also, it's about this whole idea of data-driven decision making, because the thing that today a lot of these heavy equipment in customers' operations, they've got sensors around them. They can produce a large volume of data, so they can be the operators can make much more efficient decisions in that sense. So when it comes to productivity aspects, based on a large survey that we did with over 700 businesses in the UK, we came up with a couple of really interesting headlines, which is around the headline figure is around a 1% point increase in the share of revenue earned by services relative to products that impact 2% average increase in total factor productivity. So 1% point increase in the share of revenue earned by services will lead to 2% increase in total factor productivity, and also around 1.8% average increase in total profit. So you can see that the shift is very big in that sense. So that's one of the reasons that why the UK government is investing quite heavily in this space. The other aspect is around environmental sustainability, that services can really help businesses, OEMs and users and operators to ensure they can reach their environmental sustainability targets much more quicker and much more efficient, because servitization, for instance, reduce waste, of course, in a sense that you would only repair and maintain the product when it's needed, not based on the regular intervals. And also the whole idea of circularity and circular economy around that. You use it, you repair it, you reuse it, and ultimately you recycle it. The whole cycle of circularity is very, very important to be able to save not just the cost, but also ensure that the environmental sustainability aspects are addressed. So these are probably the two key reasons as to why the UK government is investing. So it's around productivity and competitiveness, and also that net zero and circularity. I think these are the 2 points that came out quite strongly in our report as well.
Oh, that's actually fascinating. I didn't realize that just a slight amount of improvement could make quite a bit of impact. Because we're talking, yeah, that's really interesting. I think we're getting close to the time. So what we might do is we might close this session. What I'd like to do at the next session is go deep dive into the risk aspect and the organizational change requirement, because I think that would be quite interesting for people. But thank you so much for your time. And we'll catch up soon.
I hope it was useful. It was useful, but looking forward to the following sessions.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.